You're listening to Z-Talk Radio, the number one choice for music, sports, news, and talk radio. So keep that dial locked to ztalkradio.com.
The views expressed and the opinions given by the individual host and their guests do not necessarily reflect those of Z-Talk Radio or its sponsor.
Marcia, close your door.
That's a telephone alarm reporting a house fire. 87 Bernard Street between Thomas Street and Castor Park. Directed 16, engine 17. Quick Committee 7, Battalion 2, Rescue 11, Truck 10 is the wreck car 99. That's a report of a house fire with several calls. Reported the possibility of somebody still inside 87 Bernard Street between Thomas and Castor Park. Now for the deputy and the protective.
That old alarm was sounding, and he knew he had to go. But all he could think about were his little girls at home. He signed on to this job, yeah, to help the ones in need. But every time he ran into that fight, he knew he might not leave. He doesn't want any money for the things he trained to do. He wants to help the ones in need. He wants to see the whole job through. He's well aware of the cost that it takes to save a life. But that doesn't matter to the man he is inside. Yeah, we all need to sing that firefighter song. That man pulled up on scene. All he heard was those kids screaming. He ran right through the front door to save a few young dreams. A few moments later, that house it had collapsed. He'd never go back home again to hang out with his kids. He didn't want any money for the things he trained to do. He helped the ones in need, and he saw the whole job through. Well aware of the cost that it takes to save a life. That didn't matter when the family was inside. Yeah, we all need to sing that firefighter song. I hate to be the one to bring up all this sad and bad news, but that man will never have again the things that you and I do. He was taking from his kids and wife, helping a family. So please sit back, thank the Lord, there's more men like him
Battalion for ammo.
They don't want any money for the things they trained to do. They help the ones in need, and they see the whole job through. Well aware of the cost that it takes to save a life. All of that doesn't matter to the ones that are inside. Yeah, we all need to sing
And welcome to another great Supernatural Realm radio show with your host, Timothy Roxbury. We played that in tribute to Philadelphia Fire Captain Michael Goodwin, who passed away in the line of duty last Saturday, April 6th. That was a little tribute to him. We have a great guest tonight, author Edwin Becker. He wrote a book about an experience that he had with the paranormal in 1970. Ed, how are you doing tonight? Welcome to the show.
Good evening, Tim.
How are you?
Good.
That's
good. Enjoying sunny weather here in the Ozarks and chatting with you. It's going to be good fun.
Yeah, we're experiencing a little bit of rain and a little chill in the air today. So it's
sorry for that.
it's good to have you on tonight. It's going to be a great show.
Thank you.
Ed, you had some pretty frightening experience here about 41 years ago. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. I unintentionally bought a haunted house. It wasn't that I walked into it and said, "Oh, I'm buying this haunted house." In 1970, there was no such thing as haunted houses. But when you live in an old city, and you have buildings that were built in the 1800s, where they used to have funerals in the living rooms, and people died there. I found out since I released the book that there's a lot of activity in a lot of these old buildings in these older cities. And I've also learned something else. We are a mobile society. So, Marcia and I recently, I had a heart problem, and we say, okay, we've got to move closer to a hospital, and we're going to hop from one house to another. In the old days, people bought their properties to own for their lifetime. They bought their properties to give to their children and their children's children. And I believe that there's some correlation between them having such a strong sense of domain and a lot of these hauntings. But we experienced one where I don't think anything horrific happened. Much like you and I talked, no flaming skulls came flying down the hall or any demons came popping out of the closet, or we would have been out in our car. Mm-hmm. But it was slow and it was subtle. And I don't know. It's tough for me to reconcile Paranormal Witness with my book because they kind of gleamed certain things that they wanted and they held back other things intentionally. But yes, I walked in and they had a Myra. She came out swearing at us like a sailor and telling us, we don't want you here. which confused me because she was carrying this little poodle that she'd cradle like a baby, and it would bite at her dirty, filthy hair like it was looking for fleas or something. And I thought the we she's talking about was her and her dog. I think she was talking about more than that later in retrospect, I learned. But if you read the book, you realize that I was a true non-believer, and I was almost an antagonist, which I learned not to be. I spoke for the first time this weekend, and I found that many of the people are attracted to the fact that they actually held the first televised serious coverage of paranormal in 1971. We were it. And it wasn't a successful exorcism because we had a psychic and an exorcist. And if you know what psychics do, they open their mind to these things. The exorcist is exactly the opposite. And what happened was the psychic sensed something possibly demonic on the first floor. It was so malevolent he felt he couldn't handle it. This was Joseph DeLuise, a great, great man. He called it an exorcist, and the exorcist is of the opposite philosophy. You don't open your mind to anything, and so they tried to collaborate unsuccessfly, and it didn't work. But it was taken. I don't know if you saw the YouTube footage.
Mm-hmm, I did.
It was taken. Now go back to 1971. Remember that. We had no cell phones. Our phones were leased. You couldn't even own a phone. It was against federal law. We had no disposable diapers. It was the dark ages almost.
I remember when I was little. My parents. We actually had cloth diapers, and my mom would wash our diapers every time we used them. There were no, like you said, there were no such thing as disposable diapers back in those days.
Yeah, and that's what put me in a position of having to find a place to live and grabbing what I could get, even though it was an old ramshackle place. It was a roof that they couldn't take away from us because as soon as Marcia was pregnant, our landlady said, "Get out," Nobody wanted a screaming kid in their apartment. Nobody wanted a pail of dirty diapers where the diaper service picked it up once a week. So yeah, we got this place, and Marcia is more sensitive than I am, or at least she certainly was in those years. I felt nothing. I had a mixed up childhood, and there was no feelings that I hadn't felt as a child. And this may sound stupid, but I even considered the cooler rooms, and I didn't need a temperature gauge and show a 1 degree difference. They were significantly cooler. I thought that was a benefit. It was like in the years where you had to have these huge monster window air conditioners. I figured, boy, we'll get by without air conditioning in some of these places. And so I walked right into it, and my wife sensed it. Marcia sensed it, especially when we went down into the basement. She only took one step in and never went back. She said, "I'm not doing laundry down here." And I pleaded and begged, and I said, "Well, I'm going to clean the place out. I'm going to paint it all. I'm going to get rid of all the junk." "No way." She said, "I'll never come back down here." And that's where we found the hidden room in the back and the shed. I call it shed, but if people can imagine an old basement that was the building was built on the ground and then lifted up. Mm-hmm. So it was a high first floor with 7 steps up, 7 feet up to the first floor. The basement was only 6 feet with rafters, support beams that protruded. So I had a hunch over, and it was kind of it was crude because they poured the concrete and did it all by hand, kind of cave-like. And what I'm referring to as sheds, you'd probably say today they'd call them maybe storage lockers.
Right.
And we did find the one storage locker that it still was locked. It was still sealed. Now, I didn't even think about it. My logic didn't hit me at the time. that the whole house had been ransacked. I mean, they cut open upholstered furniture. They were looking for anything they could get, apparently after this person passed. But they didn't touch this one locker, this one shed. I think they all knew what was in there, and I certainly didn't. My brother didn't, who was with me. He was 14. And we popped up the lock and broke the hasp, and I found nothing in there but pornography, early nudist magazines. And I think worse than that was shoeboxes full of paper clippings. If you can imagine, like stacks of baseball cards, but they're newspapers, so there was a lot of them, rubber banded in about 4-inch square stacks. Maybe 20 shoeboxes full. And they weren't pornographic. It was, he made them pornographic. He'd cut parts of bodies out from the magazines or newspapers or cartoons. And even my 14-year-old brother looked around and he said, Ed, this guy was sick, you know. So his name was written on everything, and he became the focal point for me. Every time I had a problem, I'd bitch him out, and then whenever I wanted activity, like the moving of the door, I don't know if you'd call that intelligent or residual, because the door would open sort of what you would describe, like on your webpage, as residual. Mm-hmm. It would open it. We'd close it, and it would open at a certain time of the day, mostly in the late afternoon. But much Paranormal Witness did get it right, and when I tied it shut, Marcia became upset with me because I told her, you know, if Ben wants it open, leave it open. Everything was Ben to me. So she said, no, you know, you're crazy. Look at, you know, this thing's getting to you, and it really was. But I got mad, and I said, I'll just show you how to close the door, and I tied it, and the door would vibrate. I could swear at him and make it do it almost at will. And many of our friends came over. They witnessed it, and then they'd leave. It'd be like, goodbye. You know, they didn't come back. It didn't frighten. There was nothing that frightened me until it got to the utilities. And what I didn't know, if you saw the Paranormal Witness, was I had no idea the degree of what was going on downstairs with Dan and his wife. So he was having similar problems, in fact, worse problems.
It was worse, yeah.
Yeah, and Marcia and I were totally unaware of it. When his wife left him, we were told she went on vacation to her mother's. And that's all we knew. And after the unsuccessful exorcism, he just said goodbye. And I was never able to find him until, I wrote the book, and then he read the book and said, that's me, and contacted me. And we had an amazing reunion on the Paranormal Witness set. And then he informed Marcia and I of everything, and some of it tearfully, because it was very, very emotional, which is why I may write of it, but I won't write of it till he's ready, because it's an emotional thing. I mean, even filming Paranormal Witness, I had him stop camera 3 times when I talked about certain things. And one of the good things about talking to you and talking to radio and speaking to people is it's very therapeutic. But it broke my emotional back in about 6 to 8 months and put Marcia and I at each other's throats. I mean, I blamed her. Well, when a haunting happens, the first thing you do is you sort of ignore it. A door would open, and I would think, well, Marcia opened it, or
try to rationalize it.
Yeah, did I leave that door open? I must have left it open. And when the ashtray shot off the coffee table, I actually blamed Marcia. I said, you're waxing the damn tables too much with this. And it was the days of aerosol, so she always had a can of lemon wax in her hand, spraying everything. And I never realized that the thing was flying off at a faster level than it should. But I rationalized it, or I didn't ignore it. But it put us at each other's throats. And I think the most important thing it did is separate us. because I'd get up in the morning and her and I would share 20 minutes of conversation while the bathtub filled up and I'd take a bath. And the plug started coming out of the bathtub. And yes, I'm rationalizing. I said, well, it's Chicago, it's old plumbing, it's old this, it's old that. It's got to be sewer gas. You know, and if it shoots the plug up, where else is it going to go but wrap around the faucet? But I wound up sitting in there now watching the plug. Mm-hmm. So I'm drinking my coffee now, and that was the end of our morning conversation. And then, of course, it would take the phone off the hook, so I couldn't call home. I'd come home, I'd be aggravated. You're on the phone all day. And it pitted us against each other, and I guess it feeds off of that energy. It's something that if any of you out there are involved in an active situation, in husband and wife, partners, whatever, that's what you have to be careful for, is not to start blaming each other and to make sure that you stay together, because it will feed off the negative energy. And I became a very, very angry young man. Probably the only thing I laughed at when I met Dan after 40-some years was his image of me. By the time he moved into the apartment, I was working in the basement. I had found Ben's treasure trove of porn. I would be talking to Ben actively. So everything was, if I found something, a crack in the floor or something, I'd say, Ben, why the hell didn't your family, fix this? Mm-hmm. And Danny had access to the basement, so he would hear something downstairs. He'd open the basement door, and he'd see this big guy lumbering around with his head down, because it was only a 6-foot basement, talking to himself. I mean, that's how he saw it. Mm-hmm. Maybe I did become, in the course of maybe 6 to 8 months, maybe I did become a little bit crazy. But that's how these things can affect you. And much like you and I talked, when I hear these stories of people enduring demonic behavior for 10 years and things like that, I don't believe that one bit.
There's no way. I mean, if it's as active as they claim, why would you want to stay there?
With me, as a young man, believe it or not, I was like, it was like touche. You grew up in the inner city. I was afraid of people, gangs. I lived in Cabrini Green. So, you want to feel fear, try getting from your building to Division Street to catch the bus without getting stuck. In those days, there were no drive-bys. It was either a knife or a razor. That's fear. So I wasn't afraid of it until it touched my family. Mm-hmm. Once it started playing with the utilities, I realized my family's in danger. Then I became a crazy man. I wanted revenge. I was thinking all kinds of negative thoughts, which is what these things do to you. If they were like the movies where you open the door and a Wes Craven character popped out, we would have been sleeping in the car the first day, for Christ's sake. But it wasn't that way. And as a young man, I said, well, it's air. You're an airbag. I used to make fun of it. Mm-hmm. When it moved the mixer, you can ask Marcia, it would move the mixer and she'd get upset. And I'd say, you son of a blah, blah, blah. I'd say, impress me. Move the refrigerator. Move the stove. You can move a mixer. Anybody can move a mixer. That's how I saw it at that time. Mm-hmm. And it was Joseph DeLuise, the psychic, who came in. And, I bow to all gifted people, and I can't say this enough. He came in and he taught me behavior, how to behave, and how to pray, and how to avoid spiritual confrontation with these things. Mm-hmm. And I knew him through the years, and I truly got to understand. I don't know if you know any empaths or any psychics.
Actually, I'm an empath.
Well, first thing I'd like to say is I don't know why you tell people, because the public is so damn cruel.
It is. They are. Especially if you talk to somebody, in church, what you do. And I always get, you're dabbling, you're devil worshiper, you're going to go to hell. You shouldn't be doing that. I'm going to pray for you. I get that all the time, even with my family. My father always tells me, when you get out, take those ghosts with you. And it's just constant. I get that constantly from people.
Yeah, or you get when I was around Joe, I realized people would ask him silly questions. They'd ask him who's going to win the football game this weekend, like if he was some kind of fortune telling machine or something. Like you turn it on like the radio, and the public is very, very cruel. They'll ridicule you, and I always tell people if I were gifted, I wouldn't tell anybody.
Right.
I just wouldn't do it. But Joseph, which is why I dedicated the book to him, he taught me how to behave, and taught Marcia and I how to withstand what we were going through until we were able to finally get out. And a lot of people asked me, in the end, I gave it to the real estate man because he couldn't sell the building. And he was a dynamo, but he couldn't sell it. And I gave it to him on a quitclaim deed for legal tender at $10. And he never gave me the $10, but it was like tap, tap, no take back. I gave him my $400 escrow. I gave him everything in the building, and I ran for the hills.
Was he able to sell the house after that, or do something with it?
It's a question I'd like to answer myself. I'd like to know how many times it's been for sale in the last 40 years. I hope in my heart that it's been cleansed.
Mm-hmm.
But I knew what happened to the real estate man because 2 to 3 years later, I found his company had gone. His real estate company had gone bankrupt. They were out of business. His wife left him, and he became ill. So it's like all the things that are probably going to happen living in that situation happened to him. Mm-hmm. And it kind of paralleled what happened to Dan. I mean, Dan and his wife were newlyweds, much like Marcia and I. Their baby was born a week difference between our firstborn. They were a very loving couple, and she became tormented. She left him. He had problems that I can't even tell you the degree without his permission, but it shocked me. Had I known that, never would I have let my sister move in. And for those of you who only saw Paranormal Witness, my sister was not alone. She had a big Irish husband who became a Chicago cop, and two sons. And the actual reason she wanted in there, aside from the novelty of spirits, was it was two blocks away from where he worked, Stuart Warner. So they bullied herself in, but I knew nothing of Dan's problems, or I never would have let them come in regardless.
So he never told you anything was going on down there? He just up and decided he's moving out?
He hardly... We knew about the chandelier, and Diane shared things with Marcia. And much of it, Marcia didn't share with me because this was kind of early on in our ownership. Mm-hmm. And my answer, frankly, to most of it was, bullshit, it's a bunch of BS. And Diane didn't share with Danny because he was very superstitious. He was he's Canadian Indian. And he didn't even like, at the time I had a black star sapphire ring I wore, he didn't like black stones. He told me that attracts bad, evil spirits. So she didn't share with him. And nobody was sharing. And it wasn't, 42 years later, him and I are sitting on the Paranormal Witness set. And he says to me, "Yeah, I lost my dog too." And I said, "What dog?" He said, "You remember my dog?" I said, "No." He said, "We bought an Afghan. Huge dog." I said, "How long was it there?" "I never saw it." He said, 4 days.
4 days?
4 days, yeah, terrorized. It basically mimicked the same behavior I described in the book. It became defensive and angry and like it was going to attack something that wasn't there. Mm-hmm. And he let it out in the backyard, and he said it did exactly what I wrote. He said it ran for the back fence, jumped it easily, and was gone.
Jeez.
Excuse me. But yeah, 4 days. I never knew, neither did Marcia, that he had an Afghan.
How long?
No, we lost. Go ahead.
How many dogs did you have upstairs that you lost?
I lost 2.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we lost one that was a shepherd husky and one that was a poodle. And the poodle went pretty fast. The shepherd husky endured quite a bit of terrorizing. Our cat, Kitty, stayed with us. I mean, she went out the window twice. And I don't believe she was thrown out the window. I believe she was let down because she couldn't have endured. From the window to the concrete was about 22 to 24 feet. Mm-hmm. She wouldn't have endured that without broken bones. But every time we found her, she was right below the window, cuddled up in fear. And finally, I nailed the window shut. But our dogs, animals are funny. And, those of you who have animals out there, if you see, I know for a fact animals can see these things. And if you see your dog looking, or your cat looking off in the distance in a room where maybe there's nothing, and their eyes are tracking something, they're seeing something. Marcia and I call them travelers. They're benign. Maybe they're just passing through. I wouldn't worry, except if your dog starts to growl and goes into a defensive position. Mm-hmm.
What do you think causes some of this? You think maybe it's a portal at a location? Maybe somebody plays with Ouija boards. What's your feelings on how this stuff gets started?
I don't have any I don't have any absolute answers on that. I do know certain things. I mean, author Tom Valentine, who he wrote Psychic Mission for Joe DeLuise, which is a great book if you can get your hands on it. Mm-hmm. It's out of print. But he was a journalist in L.A., and he got involved in the paranormal after actually doing a report on mental illness. And he found out how many once he started to correlate and accumulate results, he found out how many people had drastic personality changes and became mentally ill after dabbling in the occult. So I certainly know that you don't want to mess with Ouija boards or the occult. It's nothing to play with. It's not fun. It's not entertainment. It can be very, very dangerous. With us, I blame the people that live there, but I've talked to mediums, and a medium told me that it may have been that the original owner of the land the building was built on made everybody crazy who lived in the building. Mm-hmm. And when I saw the thread, it was like, yeah, Myra was crazy. Dan's wife was definitely affected. My sister was affected. Certainly every woman on the first floor that I knew. I didn't write of Mrs. Scott at the end of my book, but there was some weird behavior that my real estate man inherited with her. So I don't know. I don't believe in the genealogy aspect that I hear often, that they look up and they chart who lived there and all that good stuff, because you're never formally introduced to the entity you're dealing with. Mm-hmm. And it's much like on the internet. You go out and you get an EVP and you say, is this John? Or what's your name? He says, my name's John. Are you a little boy? Sure, I'm a little boy. That's what you want me to be? Okay. You don't know who the hell you're talking to, mm-hmm. and how strong they are. But I don't have all the answers of what I think you can conjure it up. I think there are spirits that feel very, very strong domain toward maybe a place or an object. I do believe in objects. Mm-hmm. I could tell you, I once bought Marcia. Marcia collects wedding bands, and as we became older and I had a little more discretionary money, I'd buy her wedding bands for gifts. And I found this beautiful, it was a hand-carved rose gold wedding band in her size. Brought it home, gave it to her. She was just amazed. Wow, this is really beautiful. About a couple hours later, she comes back. She hands me the ring. I'm not going to wear this. Shows me her finger, and she's got a red like a burned finger. And I said, you're kidding me? And she said, no. And she said, watch this. She put it on her right hand. Same thing. So I took it to the jeweler. I told him to melt it. So I know there can be haunted objects. But what causes it, I'm not that smart. I just know that if you confront it, that I get lots and lots of emails. And so many things in my book I was surprised to find are very common, whether it's in the Philippines or New Zealand or Australia or UK. But when they tell me that they're hearing the voices or they're hearing footsteps in the hall, some of that open doors or common open cabinets, the first thing I ask them is, are you frightened by it? If they're not frightened by it, I tell them to ignore it. Don't study it. Don't address it. Don't open that door. Mm-hmm. It's a door that, I get lots of emails where people say, how do I get involved in the paranormal? My answer is always the same. Don't open the door. It's a corridor where there are no absolute answers. And the people who are scientific, people like yourself, and I met some wonderful people at a convention this weekend who were taking scientific approach to it and trying to measure things and gauge things and find out what triggers these things. I bow to them. That's great. But the people, much like I told you, the people that are consider it entertainment and fun, I think are idiots, to be polite. Not or ooh la la, as Craig Ferguson might say.
Thomas Fusco likes to call it the woo woo of the paranormal, because they see it on TV. They're like, woo, They think it's entertainment. They want to go out and try it out and try to get scared, without realizing, something they could bring home, something could attack them, something could attach itself to them. There's just so much that these people don't know, and it can be very it can be very scary, and they can regret what they did. Like you said, like I how you tell people, don't open that door. I wish a lot of people would heed that warning and don't go there, because they don't know what they're dealing with, what they're getting involved with.
Yeah, you can't predict what it'll do. You can't estimate its energy, and I know they can propel objects. In fact, I was co-hosting a radio show, and the guest on the break said to me he was going to lead off by saying, "Ghosts can't hurt you." Mm-hmm. And I told him, I said, if you say that, I said, we're going to go from an interview to a debate. And the engineer came in, and he said, Ed, he said, ghosts can't hurt you. He said, but that damn brick they throw is going to sting like hell. And there was a lot of truth there, They can propel objects, and I'm kind of logical minded. I love to analyze things, and the only thing I can't figure out, having seen objects propel, is they propel with a burst of energy that quickly flattens out. If you or I throw a baseball, we can throw it from a pitching mound to the catcher. A ghost can't typically do that. It'll come up with a burst of speed and then quickly fade out. Mm-hmm. So one thing that I saw many, many times that Marcia and I experienced, and I don't think when she talked about the mixer and it would happen frequently, it would come from the wall very fast and always land about the same spot. Yet when it came from the wall, if I would have just been able to, if I would have had like one kid wrote me and said, hey dude, why don't you get some of this on your iPod? He didn't realize, there were no iPods, we had no telephones. But you see a burst of speed, and then you see quickly it stops. Mm-hmm. Like if there's some invisible limit to their energy. So I have lots of questions. If you're an empath, I had a question for you.
Go ahead.
I went to a convention this weekend, and my first book signing, and I met a lot of wonderful, gifted people. But I also met a lot of other people, and there were quite a few of them. I am semi-sensitive that were carrying stuff with them. They had baggage. And do you, when you go to these things, did you ever see that?
You mean emotional baggage?
No, I'm talking about spiritual baggage.
Okay.
So there were some people I looked at, and I knew that they're dark.
Right.
You know, whether they know it or not. And I looked at others, and they were very, very clean and bright.
I have met a few people that claim to be psychic or empathic. You can tell a lot of times by looking into their eyes and feeling that energy, whether they're dark or whether they're actually bright, as you say. Yeah, I would say I have met some of those people.
I'll tell you something. As an empath, you'll probably get a kick out of it. I have a great friend, and she's a friend of Marcia and I. She's become a friend of Marcia and I. Her name is Geraldine Palmer Baus, and she's incredible. And because I admire empaths and gifted people, I don't lean on her for things and ask her about things. Sometimes I don't want to know. I do live by the philosophy, don't open that door.
Right.
But one day I was jousting and kidding with her, and I said, tell me something about myself. She was calling Marcia, and I got the phone first. And I said, tell me about myself. I want to know something. And she didn't get back to me, and a couple of days went by, and I said, dude, next time she called, I said, tell me about myself. And she didn't. I'll tell you something later. Well, she called my wife, and she says, damn it, she said, all I can see is Ed surrounded by cartoons. She said, I'm just getting this image, Ed surrounded by cartoons. And she mentioned the Aristocats, which is a Disney thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I laughed my butt off because I've been obsessed. We're moving, and I have an enormous collection of books called Del Giant Comics. I go upstairs, and Marcia wasn't even aware of it, and I had them all spread out all over the rec room. I was completely surrounded by Del Comics. And she picked that up clearly, and I got such a kick out of it. Mm-hmm. But it also leads me, to the fact that sometimes you people get images that you have to carry around. When I knew Jill DeLuise, he would know that there was going to be some disaster. He'd describe it to me clearly. But he was tormented by the fact that he didn't know exactly where or when. Mm-hmm. And that's a burden that I couldn't live with. When you have so much of that piling up in your mind, it would be like, I can't live with that. How do you deal with that?
I do the best I can. Even when I'm in a mall or in a large group of people, I feel, all types of energy, happy, sad, depression. I get all kind of energies coming at me at once. And a lot of times, if I spend, an X amount of time in that environment, I have to just come home, come to my room and just relax. I have to be by myself for a while. And, it's just, basically that's how I do it, and just, relax and try to get everything off my mind and what I experienced. 3 years ago, we did an investigation at Waverly Hills. I don't know if you know Waverly Hills. What happened there.
No.
But they said that it was a tuberculosis hospital. It was said that 6,000 people died there, patients of tuberculosis. And we were there from 7 o'clock at night till like 4 o'clock in the morning. And the ride home after that experience was so draining. It actually took me, I think I stayed in my room after work for like 4 weeks, just trying to relax and get, it physically and emotionally just drained me. I had no energy whatsoever. And you just, a lot of times you just got to wait for that, the drainage to just go away. And a lot of times it takes hours for it to dissipate.
Let me ask you this, and I like to ask this because my next book is going to be called The Aura, and it's about a gifted person. And I'm always interested to know, as children, we all grow up, and we all kind of feel that everybody can do what we can do. So I had a great musical ear, and I had a number of talents, and I kind of assumed everybody had the same talents.
Mm-hmm.
When you're empathic, when did you discover it, and what happened when you did, and when you? I kind of assumed that if you had these feelings when you were in your youth, that you probably assumed other kids had the same ability.
Yeah, I knew I was always treated different than other kids. Like, when I was in grade school, we'd go to physical education, or we'd go out in the playground for phys ed and stuff, and we'd break up in teams. I would always be next to the last person to get picked, and I'd never understood why. Like people shun the other kids shunned away from me. Like I was so different than them, and never understood why until I met my friend Donnie, who kind of opened me up to my abilities and who I was. Before I started into the paranormal field back in 2008, I was then where I started realizing that, hey, I am different. I have these abilities. These abilities are real. They're not, I'm not to be ashamed of them, but to use them to help people and to become more knowledgeable of what they are and who I am as a person.
It has to be a tough adjustment. But I love gifted people, and I think there's so many, and they have different gifts and different levels of that gift. This weekend I got to meet someone called Christia Cummings Slack, and she's a healer. And when I saw her, I almost had to put on my sunglasses. I swear to God. She is so bright that it would amaze me if she couldn't heal you. I mean, she was like looking at an angel.
Mm-hmm.
And some of these people are just like yourself. Are to me, they just amaze me. And I admire the hell out of you, especially for going public.
Mm-hmm.
I certainly would. Publics, they want entertainment. Much like the TV programs. They put on the night vision goggles and the ghosts only come out at night. It's a bunch of crap. It's much like Paranormal Witness, believe it or not. I did not want to do. I wanted no part of it. My family talked me into it, and they don't pay you for the story. So, people who said you want to make money, they don't give you any money. And I kind of knew people in show business, and I knew that they're going to take my story and they're going to cram it into 41 minutes to make good TV, which is exactly what they should do. So They're not doing anything wrong. In our case, they expanded it to 63 minutes. And they were, very, very aware of our feelings. So they'd be calling us frequently from London, which is where they're based, telling us what they were cutting and how they were changing things. But, that's entertainment, and that's what it's supposed to be. It's much like I don't trust, if I see a true ghost story written by a third-party writer, published through a traditional publishing house, whatever you read there, you better read with a large, large lump of salt. Because as a writer myself, I've done some ghostwriting for some people. I tend to embellish it. You like a dog, you're going to pee on it and make your mark.
Right.
And in the publishing house, their only goal, I broke ties with two of them very early on in my life because they didn't care fiction, nonfiction. They want to sell books. And, it's their job to sell books. So they don't care about a true story, actually. They want you to add to it. They want to, I was told True Haunting had no commercial value unless I added a whole bunch of flying skeletons and demonic voices and things, people floating through the air and blood on the walls is a classic one,
Uh-huh.
I refused. I said, no, I'm not going to do that. It was originally written as a diary, my own therapy. The story itself actually is very incomplete.
Will you be writing a sequel to that book in the future? Any chance of that?
Oh, definitely. Because I wrote that in a fishbowl. People find this hard to believe, and they find it hard to believe that I can still get emotional on certain points of what we experienced, and I still can. I mean, as a man, you know, when you're supposed to protect your family, and we were stuck in this situation, and I had no means and no money, it broke my emotional back. I still get flashbacks of I felt true despair. Probably the lowest point in my whole life, and it was the weakest point in our marriage. But I never did interview Marcia, and I didn't because it hurt me.
Mm-hmm.
When you leave your wife somewhere where you know she's going to be frightened, and you have to, you feel guilt. I felt a tremendous amount of guilt. So she's probably got a host of occurrences that, you know, she could add, and I get a lot of emails asking how she survived, and she did have a method to her madness. She would close off the kitchen, and she would open the back door to the porch, and she had a little TV, and she'd bring the baby in the kitchen, and she had a whole routine where she knew she could run out if something frightened her. And then I've got Dan, and Dan, actually, I'd start writing as soon as Dan agrees to tell me his story and not to pull his punches.
Mm-hmm.
But he knows the emotional ringer I'm going to run him through. I'm not going to settle for just the occurrences. I want to know how he felt emotionally and what happened to his wife. I know some of it is pretty ugly. I mean, they were touched. He was bitten. There's some real. It was way worse than what Marcia and I experienced. So I understood, you know, how his whole life did a crash and burn. So I'd love to write a second book, but I won't do it unless Dan White agrees to give me the 2 chapters I need that are going to make people turn the pages fast.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to do it just to do it, you know.
Mm-hmm. I remember you told me when we talked on Skype that there was a lot of parts that you had left out of the book, as far as the activity and what you experienced.
Yeah, some of it I just felt was redundant. You know, if it moves a mixer and it moves broom and it moves plates, move. You know, it was moving lots of stuff, and it would move our stuff, and I'd blame Marcia. You know, where's my wallet? You know, that kind of thing. And she's, I didn't touch your wallet. You know, where's my keys? I didn't touch your keys. And she had a broom that moved, and in paranormal witnesses showed crashing dishes, but our actual dishes were, we didn't have much money. And in those years, if you bought $25 worth of groceries, you got a free plate or a free cup and saucer of melamine, which was a fancy way of saying plastic.
Mm-hmm.
So we had nothing breakable. Had it started throwing the plates, they would have been like frisbees going through the house. I pulled my punches on a lot of that because it was just kind of redundant. Where I really pulled my punches was on the emotional aspect of what Marcia and I went through. Mm-hmm. It tore us up pretty good. And I really did with my sister and what she turned to in child abuse. I can't stomach child abuse, so I have difficulty writing of child abuse. Anybody who wants to know how I feel about child abusers, read my book, Death List. You know, I kind of feel that the people we have on the street today that are 6-time, 4-time, 3-time offenders, 100 years ago we would have hung them. There'd be no plea bargaining and out on probation and that kind of crap.
Right.
You know, our sole defense for our children is a sex registry. So you kind of know where the lions live. That's your defense. Our legal system just failed in that regard.
It did. It failed in a lot of areas.
But my sister never actually took her kids back. She when she disappeared, she left her husband, and eventually they agreed to split the 2 boys. And Marcia and I actually were going to adopt the one boy because she was abusing him. And but you know, when you talk about child abuse, it's a class thing.
Mm-hmm.
If in the suburbs of Chicago and Barrington, let's say, if our child took her to the doctor and she had a little bruise, the doctor would, where'd you get that bruise? How did it happen? You know, blah, 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 blah. My sister would take her son, she'd clock him in the head with a steel locomotive train. He'd go to the ER and get stitches in the inner city, okay? Mm-hmm. Doctor would say, how did you get that? And he'd say, my mom hit me. Oh, okay. They just stitch it up and out the door. So we have different levels of concern in our society.
Have you talked to your sister much after she left the house?
No, in fact, I could probably count on two hands the times we saw each other in life after that.
Mm-hmm.
So she intentionally, she avoided me, and all family she considered. Her children left at an early age. I don't want to talk about how awful their childhoods were, but
right.
They were on their own pretty quickly and succumbed to some of the evils in our society, drugs and whatnot. My sister tended to become a recluse, and she was married about 3 or 4 times, 3 times that I know of, more. Very short marriages. And when I tried to reach her was when our mother died. My mother wanted to see her before she died, and she wouldn't come to see us. She wouldn't come out of her apartment. She wouldn't open the door. She has no phone. So I had to call the building manager to ask the building manager. We'd go down and talk to her, but I haven't seen her since 1992. And I sent her son after her because I had some things for her from my mom, and he said all she'll say is "Get away, demons!" when he knocks on the door.
Jeez. And
she's been diagnosed with schizophrenia, bipolar. Some people think she's possessed. To this day, she walks around talking to things that you or I can't see.
Mm-hmm.
It ruined her life, and without giving away any of Dan's story, his wife was also tormented in a similar way. And in retrospect, I look at it and I think, man, that's Myra. Myra was crazy as a loon, and I had a tendency to blame the family, but it may have not been the family at all.
Mm-hmm. May have been with the activity in the house causing a lot of it.
Sure. I mean, I know for a fact that had I stayed there 3 or 4 years, I probably would have been nuts myself.
How long did you and Marcia stay there?
Well, if you can imagine, I was a total non-believer, okay?
Mm-hmm.
We bought the building, and I started believing probably around March or April. And I believed it when we saw the full apparition. Then I questioned it. It didn't frighten me because if I had a picture and we could show it to our listeners, it was an old lady. There was nothing scary about her. And when Marcia and I saw her, I just said to Marcia, "Can you see that?" And she said, "Yeah." And she sort of turned and walked into an alcove and disappeared. Solid as you and I. If I had a photograph of her, 90% of people would say it's just an old lady.
Right.
But by the time we were there 8 months, I knew we were in trouble. Marcia knew long before, but I knew we were in trouble. We started looking for help. That's when I started putting more pressure on the church, and they resisted. They didn't want to give me any help. And at one point, I can remember August of that year, I just buried my face in my hands and said, what the hell am I going to do? There were no people like yourself or investigative groups. I just love all you guys because so many of you may not realize it, but you're out there curiously looking for things. And when you're dealing with the people who are experiencing these things, you validate and you offer, you believe it or not, you're going to heal them in a way. Because at least they know they're not going nuts.
They're crazy.
In 1970, that's all Marcia and I heard was, "You're crazy."
Mm-hmm.
And
that had to be.
I'm sorry.
That had to be horrible for you to go, experience that, and knowing that there wasn't any, if at all, any help out there. I just can't imagine what you guys must have felt, and I honor you for coming forward with your story. That would take some courage to be able to talk about it.
And don't honor me because actually, if I'm honest, I gave the manuscript to my daughter with her name on it.
Mm-hmm.
I did not want to stick my head out into the paranormal world. And with Paranormal Witness, my book went to #1 in London on paranormal, which is it's a good thing, for anybody, but in London it's highly unusual because they don't take to American independent writers. Mm-hmm. And that's where Paranormal Witness is based in London. So that it sent them to my door, and my family was just angry with me because I kept turning them down. I kept making up excuses. No, I don't want to do this. I was frightened. I've been called crazy enough. I had no idea of the size of the paranormal community, that there was a paranormal community, and I've just been delighted at how Marcia and I both have been welcomed. Totally unlike what we experienced in 1970, where we were told to get our heads examined. Mm-hmm. So it's been a good experience.
We got about a minute and a half left of the show.
And a half.
Yeah.
Can I say hello to Mary Nielsen in Scotland, Mandy Howland in the UK, Dave McEllen in the UK, Trevor Bogue, a classy dude in Australia. All of you, hello. And to Mr. McCool, Mickey McCool in the UK, a great investigation group.
Where could
go on?
Go ahead.
I want to say hello to Jerry and my girl in Louisiana, Jill, and Nancy in Alabama, Richard in Florida. Thank you so much for what you sent. I'll leave it at that. I got to include John Conway in Kansas City and Laura Zook in Kansas City. I have wonderful, wonderful friends, and that I've met through this business. Love them all.
Where can people get your book if they want to learn more about your story or read it? How can they get a copy of it?
Most popular is Amazon.com, and they're worldwide. So there's Amazon UK and Amazon.com here in the U.S., Barnes & Noble. And know that anybody who writes me, my web address is in every single book. I will return every email answered the way I would like it answered. I really treasure the correspondence. It's probably the only thing real thing I enjoy. So yes, I will answer it. And www.edwinbecker.com. And then there's a wonderful site my daughter created, truehaunting.com, www.truehaunting.com. And it's got a little bit about Paranormal Witness and the background.
Okay. I think we got to end the show here, Edwin. I'd love to have you back here in the very near future. Maybe we can dive a little deeper in your book and what you and Marcia experienced, and maybe we could even have her on the show as well. You're listening to Supernatural Realm on the Z-Talk Radio Network. We got to end the show. Goodbye, everybody.
Thank you, Timothy.
You're welcome. If you just hang on a minute there, Ed, I'd like to talk to you after we go up the air.
Sure.